Hello and welcome to the Culture Reset podcast with me, Caroline Kenyon.
And me, Juliet Kumar. In this episode, we're going to hear from someone who leads on culture in a company which is owned by its employees. Welcome, Rhiannon Cars of Curtins. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yes, I'm Rhiannon Cars. I'm a board director at Curtins, and my responsibility extends across communications and engagement, and as you mentioned, their culture as well.
And Curtins is an engineering consultancy with 14 offices in the UK and Ireland. And it all started in Liverpool, I know, and in fact down the road from where we are right now at 19 Rodney Street in Liverpool. How did it all begin?
That's right. Well, in fact, the story started just before them, Karen, because so Bill Curtin, our founder, moved from Brixton to Liverpool, and he was teaching in the College of Building. So he was teaching structural engineering. And he liked that. He was having a nice time, but he felt that he wanted to do and not just teach. So what he did was he took his best and his brightest students, as he would say, and they set up WG Curtin Partners from his back bedroom in Egbert. And that was about, I think, 2 years or so before kind of a decision, I think, was made within the family between Bill and his wife, Ella, that was no longer viable. And so they moved to, set up kind of more officially, I suppose, in Rodney Street, just down the road.
I'm going to be talking about culture in Curtins because I think it's got a great story to tell. But it all started with those early days, isn't it? The roots of Curtins actually laid down the foundations for the current culture.
Absolutely. And I sometimes do wonder, actually, like, how aware was Bill of that? Was that just really natural? Or actually, did he think about, like, the flowers he was planting in the garden that perhaps he wouldn't get to see grow, but that others would? And I guess we'll never really know the answer to that. Bill passed away back in the 90s, but he definitely kind of resonates, like the legacy. My God, it's so strong. He had a culture, I suppose, of real social mobility. Before that phrase was like popular, before people started talking about it, he set the business up by getting in his car, driving around the youth clubs of Toxteth and Speak, and some of them already deprived parts of Liverpool. And he said, do you want to be an engineer? Do you want a job? And that's how, these are the literal foundations of Curtin. So I think that idea of giving opportunity, of nurturing from within. I mean, obviously they didn't all stay with us, but quite a few of those early days members of staff went on to open offices, become board directors. The apprentice that Bill took on in Rodney Street stayed with the business for 43 years and 20 of those as chief executive. So I really do think that those early days of, like I say, providing opportunity, nurturing from within, have played their part through the other sort of 65 years to this day.
Great. And your own role, you've just recently taken on responsibility for culture, haven't you? How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a fun one because we did have quite a sort of serious conversation about whether culture should be one person's responsibility. Because culture is, it's everywhere, it's everything, it's all the time. And is it right that actually is associated to one board director? But it was so important to us, and we felt that we did need to lean into it. We've got a really strong culture. We're really, really lucky. We've always been independent. We're employee owned. We've been going for 65 years. But we'd never really sat down and actually determined what is our culture. How do we articulate it? How do we evolve it when we need to? How do we protect it? So those really kind of big thoughts, questions needed to have, I think, that kind of board direction. So that's where the opportunity kind of came to me. And I suppose I, put myself in the right place as well for that to become my responsibility.
Yeah, that sounds great. So when you describe the company as employee-owned, what's that mean in practice? What does that do for the culture?
So, back in 2021, we officially transitioned to be employee-owned, so an employee-owned trust. And essentially what that means is absolutely everybody in the business is an equal shareholder. Now, you don't necessarily have your certificate. On your kind of first day one, you get a stamped certificate. It's more that in principle. So all of our shares, so there's 400 staff, all of those shares are held in a trust. And then we have trust directors, and they're kind of elected into that position. So they are members of staff, and it's on a rotating basis, but they get elected into that position. And the operations board and the governance board is accountable to the trust board. And we have an external member of that team as well, who just kind of helps to guide us and works with the employees and with the chief executive.
Is that kind of like John Lewis, or is
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, it used to be like really quite unusual, but I think people are really starting to see the value in it now. Mm-hmm. So John Lewis, exactly, Co-op. There are a few members of the construction industry, which Curtins is in, but not that many. But we're seeing a bit more of a tide to it now, and I think it's definitely something that's being pushed by Labour from Westminster to give that voice to employees and kind of share that influence.
So you're sort of saying that culture is everyone's responsibility, and it's the things that we do, it's the rituals we have, the artifacts that we see. So what kind of things practically have you done to really try and embed that culture with your staff and with new employees as well?
From an employee ownership perspective, or more broadly?
Well, both, I guess.
So from an employee ownership perspective, it was quite an interesting journey actually to go on, I think, because I'll be honest, when we first started talking about it, I didn't really know what it meant. It sounded like a nice concept. It sort of felt like it worked for Curtins because we've always been independent. We've never had external shareholders. It was always members of staff who were our shareholders. So it felt like the very kind of obvious, I suppose, next step for our business. But we weren't really sure how it would play out for us. I think there probably was a little bit of maybe even suspicion. What does this mean? Why are we doing this? But I think, kind of a couple of years in, we've got into our rhythm now. So we have an employee representative forum, and those are, again, elected members of staff from each of our 14 offices. And we come together every quarter, and I'm the sort of board representative as part of that. So I'm not an employee forum rep myself, but I join that, and I'm kind of the conduit between the board and the employee forum. And we deal with the tricky items. We talk about the things that, what do we want to see more of? What do we want to see less of? So that conduit, that community that go back into the office, that act as that literal voice in both directions, in fact, is probably one of the most significant displays of what does employee ownership mean, because it's quite visible.
So really engagement at its core.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is all about that colleague voice. It's about not sort of kind of making assumptions. It's about asking the questions. It's about genuinely listening, being open to that feedback, being transparent, saying, well, we'd love to be able to do that, but we can't, and this is why. And I think so often these decisions are made in a boardroom, and that transparency isn't communicated. And therefore, if the members of staff don't know what's going on, why a decision has been reached or whatever it may be, then inevitably they'll be less engaged. Inevitably, they won't feel that sense of ownership. Whereas actually, if they are part of that decision, understand the process, then I just think it's much more likely to have higher engagement, higher success, higher retention, and ultimately, a better service for our clients as well.
I think it also generates a readiness for change because they're aware of what's going on, and as things are being decided.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And it's kind of happened quite naturally, that. We probably had a couple of years of finding our way. How does this work for us? But it seemed to kind of just find its flow. And we've, the people that want to be around that table and as part of that conversation are naturally just quite driven individuals, quite comfortable with sharing their opinion, but also taking that back to their offices and being able to communicate it back to the local teams as well.
So what do you think Bill would make of the decision to go?
Oh, I just wish I wish he'd have known. I really genuinely really do wish he'd have known that this is what we did, because I think he'd be delighted. Yeah.
And does this way of working make it more difficult to be agile and innovative, to switch course suddenly in response to market conditions?
I don't think it does, because we still have an operations board. So we still have the board that run the business. We just do it in, I suppose, connection with the employment forum reps and the trust board as well. So that line is quite clean. That line is quite neat. That's the engine room of the business. So there is still that ability to be able to be dynamic, to be agile. And well, it's so much more important than it ever has been before to be able to kind of act in that way, I think. And one of our values is curiosity. And I really do see that now as coming more into the fore than it ever has done before, to be able to innovate, to be able to kind of have that energy to kind of be looking forwards.
And there's a lot of change externally, we could say, couldn't we? Globally, there's a lot of change. The economy globally is affecting everybody and every company. What would you say are the core values that are going to persist no matter what? You mentioned curiosity. What else would you say are the absolute core values that are going to sustain you?
Well, I mean, I don't want to kind of just do the cop-out answer, but I think it's our values. So integrity. I think just having a real conviction in what you believe, and it not necessarily being the popular opinion, but it being the right opinion. And for us, it's really important that we empower our staff to have their own sense of integrity, and to be able to kind of use that power when they're speaking, with clients, etc. Another of our values is being human. And I think, again, to me, that really speaks to me that we don't have to be superhuman, but we just have to be human. And all that comes with that, with being caring, with being friendly, with being nurturing, with looking out for one another, having a community. And I completely hear what you're saying in terms of those external pressures and influences that we're having to withstand. They're really core, I think, those values, to be able to say no, almost get things straight at home, if you like, and have that kind of grounded view and that grounded experience that you feel in a strong enough and a robust enough position to be able to handle those external influences because you have this sense of community. I do think that's the right word, kind of within the business.
So Curtins is part of the Purpose Coalition, a network of organisations that are committed to breaking down barriers to opportunity. And it's chaired by Justine Greening, the former Secretary of State for Education. So what does that give you, being part of that coalition?
It's actually a really, really wonderful opportunity for Curtins. So yes, you're right. So it's a network of lots and lots of different businesses. There's universities in there as well. There's healthcare professionals. There's all sorts of different industries and sectors. And essentially what unites all of these different businesses and organizations is a sense that we are a force for good, or at least we should be. And in particular, that business should be making the most of that opportunity to be a force for good. And obviously that shows up in so many different ways. But what Curtins get from being part of the coalition is the opportunity to collaborate, the opportunity to understand, right, what are other people doing? How are they perhaps managing this challenge, or how are they kind of pursuing this opportunity? And a lot of what we talk about is scalable. So, we're working with businesses like Travelodge and Eon and Centrica. They're enormous. We absolutely don't have the resources that they have. The time, the money, the people power, but we can have a conversation about, right, but what would work for Curtins, and how could we perhaps work with other members in different sectors and learn from them and translate that into the construction sector, which, to be honest, is often lagging a little bit behind others. So it's just the opportunity to learn and then to put those things into action. So it's been absolutely brilliant for us. It really has. And I suppose the second kind of part of that is the connection that we have with MPs, with ministers, and directly into Westminster. So the conversations that we're having are influencing policy changes. They are influencing legislation. So we don't feel that we're just kind of talking into an echo chamber. These things take time. I'm learning that. These things don't happen quickly. But that sense of momentum, because of the power of the partnership of all the different organisations, definitely feels like it's in transit.
I love that. I love that whole picture of a learning system and all organisations sharing what they're doing and how they're doing it. Mm-hmm. It just cuts so much wasted time trying to do it yourself, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we always think about Curtins as, what's the ripple effect opportunity? So what can we do with our resources that's reasonable for us that will have the biggest impact? And sometimes that extends, just to our people. Sometimes that extends to the construction industry, but often it extends the wider world, the wider community that we're serving. But we have to be reasonable. We are only, 400-person business. So being able to work with other organisations for us is the absolute dream, to be able to put that kind of ripple effect in motion.
Absolutely. So can you give us an example of a change that you've made to improve opportunities for the people in your industry?
Yeah, absolutely. The one that comes to mind is probably the work that we've done around inclusive PPE. So I don't know if you're aware of this, and it certainly was a bit of a school day for me when I learned just how uninclusive PPE can be. Personal protective equipment.
Okay.
So our staff are going out onto construction sites. So obviously you have to put on your high-vis jacket, and you have to put on your hard hat, and you have to put on your big boots, and might be goggles, there might be gloves, and keep yourself safe on site. But they really are they're designed for a 6-foot man. And so we have, and it could be, it could be smaller men, it could be women that are going out onto site and having to fold up the trousers 3 times. They can't see because the hat's too big. The boots are absolutely enormous. So, not only is that not safe, you've perhaps been asked to climb a ladder, but also you look like you're dressed up in a nursery playgroup. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't look like you're there as a professional who is, giving out instructions to, site workers. It's very hard to be taken seriously. So we worked really hard to try and just beg, borrow and steal, to be honest, inclusive PPE. We were having to buy gloves from Amazon, which is something that we try not to do. We were having to just kind of look here, there and everywhere. We're spending an awful lot more money to find inclusive PPE that took into account the people that are actually wearing it. And that's fine. That's just what we needed to do. But it felt so frustrating. But through the Purpose Coalition, we're now having conversations directly about changing legislation, because one of the big struggles that we found was the supply wasn't there. And the supply's not there because the demand's not there. If you change legislation and enforce having inclusive PPE, then all of a sudden the suppliers are going to have to provide more options. So like I said earlier, this is taking time. This is not happening quickly. It's not happening overnight, but I can see that building. And we're talking in UK Reef, which is a big kind of property and construction event in May, where we'll hopefully kind of build that even further. And Justine Greening is joining us for that. And it really will just hopefully give us the opportunity to talk to more people. And I suppose this really is the example of, we know the idea is right. We know that is the right thing to do. We talk so often about, the construction industry. It's not diverse. The gender pay gap is much bigger than in other sectors. We know that we've not got the talent that we need and we want. But what I keep saying is, how can we expect women to join an industry where they've not even been considered, where they don't feel like they belong? So such a simple thing like giving people inclusive PPE immediately signals, I've been thought about. If I've been thought about, then maybe I do belong here. So with that, I suppose that's probably the most kind of recent example of something that we've been doing from its practical terms.
And feeling that you belong is such a huge part of culture, isn't it? And
it's enormous, yeah.
Positive workplace culture.
How does that work with a Purpose Coalition? Help Curtins' bottom line. A business has to be about profitability for your future, for your sustainability. But how does that role and all the time and resource you're putting into that work, how does it help the business?
I suppose there's a couple of things, really, depending on whether we're talking about kind of today or tomorrow. I'd say today, it's a really good kind of profile raising opportunity. It aligns so well with our values. So the profile that we are raising is a positive one. It suits us. It serves us. We are a values-driven business. We want to work with other values-driven businesses. So it gives us that opportunity to make noise, I suppose. And we're already seeing the benefits of that. We don't necessarily, we don't want to grow. We're not pursuing, a huge kind of growth and revenue. We want to be robust. We want to be durable. We want a sustainable business model. So staying true to our values, being part of initiatives like Breaking Down Barriers and the Purpose Coalition provides, I think, that kind of platform for us to be able to do that. But if we're talking about the tomorrow picture and the benefits, the bottom line, I genuinely believe that we will be appealing to a more diverse talent pool because of the work we're doing. And I 100% believe that a diverse workforce is a more successful workforce. absolutely for the bottom line. Our engineers are problem solvers. They're creative thinkers. We're designing projects for communities, and they are diverse communities. So the more that we can have of that representation when we're solving those problems, when we're thinking creatively, the better it will serve the community. And if our designs better serve the community, then inherently we're going to be a more successful business. And I do think that, yes, that plays to a well-being piece. But I also absolutely believe with conviction that also plays to a profit line as well.
I guess, with the more diverse workforce and, encouraging that diversity, it speaks to young people as well. They'll look at your company and go, that's for me, I can do that. That's a career path that I can go down.
100%. And it's really interesting, actually. I've been doing quite a lot of work recently around, the generation divides and how do we make sure that we create a culture where we can learn from one another. I read a statistic, I don't know how true it is, but in November, I think they've actually given a date and a time. In November this year, 25% of the workforce will be Generation Z. So we have to make sure that our culture appeals to them, facilitates that, but at the same time, making sure that we don't forget about our Generation Xers, making sure that actually they still feel valued, that they still belong. And I think making space for both ends of that spectrum, obviously, as well as the generations in between, is really where the challenge lies, actually, but the opportunity as well. Because I think if we can crack that, and bearing in mind what they want is very different. What their values align to can be quite different. What they're looking for from the workplace can be very different. But it's finding, right, okay, what's that mutual ground? And how can we make that work? And how can we provide a culture that gives space to curiosity, to innovation, to kind of thinking about the future? And a lot of those problems, I think, that will be solved, particularly around the digital and AI areas, they probably won't be solved by the leaders of our business. They're more likely to be solved by, Generation Zs and Generation Alphas coming through. So that's where not only do we want to be working, in our business to create that kind of culture for success, but we want to be getting into, it's not unis and colleges, it's primary schools, where we want to be speaking to them about, God, what does a career in engineering look like? And it's probably not what an experience of a, person in their late 50s is having now.
We have to finish there, Rhiannon. Mm-hmm. But before you go, what would be your top tip that you would share with listeners about how you'll go about resetting culture or developing culture?
Ooh, top tip. So we've actually been doing an exercise at the moment, which is about really defining our culture, which we've never done before. We talk about Curtins culture all the time. We talk about it very proudly, but we've never actually defined it. So we've done culture surveys, focus groups. We've worked with the Employee Forum. We've worked with our senior management team to really understand, right, what is our culture? And we've got it down now to 10 cultural traits that we understand how they show up in behaviors. So define it. And then really, really challenge yourself and ask yourself, are they a strength or are they a shadow? And the chances are a lot of those traits are both. So can I give you an example? Mm. So one of our cultural traits is friendly and nurturing, right? Sounds lovely, doesn't it? It's nice and comfy, and it's absolutely true. But if you're not careful, the shadow of that is that you almost embody some of the worst bits of perhaps like a family business where, perhaps do you give permission to people to get away with things that they perhaps shouldn't? Do you protect people? Do you defend them? In a way that doesn't serve them? So I think what we've really had to do with getting these cultural traits defined is then challenge ourselves to go, right, how do we make sure that we play those as strengths? And how do we do that across 14 locations? So I would say my tip, sorry, that's a very meandering way around of saying, force yourself to define it. And it's harder than you think.
Absolutely. I mean, we've done some of that work in the past. So, and we got down to behavior. So what would you be seeing and doing if you had a friendly and kind culture?
I mean, if it's a strength, it's really symbolic things like we've got a chatty office. So people genuinely care about their colleagues. Yes, about the work they do, but about the families, about the holidays, about the dogs, about the hamsters. I think it's a feeling, it's a vibe when you walk into any of our offices, to be honest, that you feel greeted, you feel welcomed, you feel immediately part of a warmth. So I think there's that to it. We're a sociable bunch. So we have our company get together every other year where pretty much everybody takes a Friday off work and we go to, last year it was in Bear Grylls, and we spend the day doing team building exercises. We have our staff awards at night. And then we had it's called Rockaoke, which is amazing. It's like karaoke, but with an actual band. It was brilliant. So I think it shows up in ways that it's almost your relationship goes beyond just project delivery.
Yeah, sounds great.
It sounds absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us, Rhiannon Cars of Curtins. And if you'd like to hear from more amazing individuals leading on workplace culture, do check out our other Culture Reset episodes and follow us so you don't miss a future instalment. But for now, thank you for listening. And it's goodbye from me, Caroline Kenyon.
And from me, Juliet Kumar. Goodbye.